Now we move out of South Africa, where the story of Jason Arday is difficult to reduce to just one headline. A young black boy from South London, diagnosed with autism and developmental delays, who was once described as being unable to speak, read, or write, eventually rises through the education system and at the age of 37 makes history at one of the world's most prestigious universities in 2023, Cambridge. Cambridge University appointed him as Professor of Sociology of Education at the tender age of 37, making him the university's youngest ever black professor. His story was celebrated as one of extraordinary resilience, but then the story changed. And within a few years, the celebration surrounding the appointment had been replaced by questions over the credibility of parts of his academic records, his professional history, and some of the extraordinary claims attached to his biography. And suddenly, a man once held as a symbol of what was possible became the subject of intense public scrutiny. And in that same space of just weeks, those questions escalated from allegations to completing narratives into university investigations, his resignation, and now his death. To help us unpack the story, we are joined by Afua Hagan, senior international correspondent here at News Central. Afua, many thanks for joining us. And again, we will say, all of us here at the table, we do pass our condolences to you and the family. Darshan?
Thank you very much.
Afua, before we get into the controversy, I want us to understand the man. Who exactly was Jason Arday? What should people remember about the man beyond the headlines?
And I think that's such a huge question and a really important question to start with. Of course, he was father, a brother, a nephew. He was a colleague and a friend to so many people, but he was also a sociologist, an author, an educator, someone who cared deeply about representation, particularly for people with autism and ADHD, particularly for Black men in higher education. He was someone who also cared very deeply about people, about lots of people. I've heard so many incredible stories about the work that he did with people and how touched they were when he came and did that particular work with them. You know, he was incredibly articulate. He was incredible at expressing how much he wanted to make a change in the world. Yes, he was a professor at Cambridge at 37, but he had done so much work before that. You know, he wasn't verbal till he was 11. It took a long time for him to learn to read and write. But when he did, he absolutely excelled. He was an exceptional educator, an exceptional communicator, and someone who was just loved by so many different people in so many walks of life.
All right, Afua. Let's talk about his personal journey, which was extraordinary, to say the least. From being diagnosed with autism and developmental delays as a child to eventually making history as a Cambridge professor. How much of that story do you think shaped the way the public viewed him? And why did his rise to Cambridge become such a powerful story?
I think he was enormously symbolic of just what is possible, right? Just what is possible when you put your mind to it. He was a bit of a unicorn, you know, his story was absolutely remarkable. And so it was such a huge part of who he was and of how people viewed him, how they considered him, and also a huge part of his rise towards Cambridge University and perhaps why he was installed as a professor at just 37 years old. Like I said, it wasn't necessarily about representation of the Black community or for the SEND community or the community of people with autism and ADHD. He was a representation of simply what is possible when you put your mind to it, you know? And so I think that was hugely symbolic and was a huge part of his journey and a really essential part of his story. His work really focused on race, inequality, and education. And these were all such intersections when it came to him and when it came to his work. His work consistently addressed the importance of having underrepresented people in the higher echelons of higher education. And Cambridge University, you know, is the pinnacle of that. And he was really passionate about making sure that other young people could see people like him in higher education, in academia, making a change, publishing work, writing books, and really putting themselves out there. So like I say, I think he was hugely symbolic of just what is possible.